which cannot fail to keep man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is condemnation before investigation.
You know, the director and actor Spike Lee tried to warn us in the 1988 movie School Days.
Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! Come on! Wake up!
Please, wake up.
Why has there been such a pervasive history of hatred toward black people? And why don't we know our history and culture and roots past the year 1619? Did the Catholic Church, America, and Western theology know the truth by intentionally keeping everyone misled? If you don't have the answer to these questions, well, you need to listen to this video right now. Okay, we're going to do an experiment we did in my psych class when I was in school. It's called the McGurk effect. I'm going to play a recording of people chanting that is embarrassing 4 times. And after the 4th time, I want you to type in the chat what you heard. If you're ready, listen very closely now.
That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing!
I know most of you are going to type in the chat, you heard that is embarrassing. But are you sure that's what you heard? Listen again.
That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing!
What did you hear that time? Okay, how about now?
That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing!
Okay, how about now?
That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing!
Okay, now.
That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing!
That's freaky, ain't it? You heard the same sound every single time, but your ears and your eyes do too, taking singles and your brain interpret them as you expect them to be. We don't see reality most of the time. We see our perception of reality. That's why you can read something and conceive something totally different, or see something and your mind conceive something totally different. If we don't see reality and we only see our expected reality, what if somebody had been playing with our perceptions so we are led to believe an alternate reality?
You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
Is very foundational to understanding the rest of the Bible. So we're going to focus on this. And I want to remind you what Edmund Spencer said. We bring this up every once in a while. There is a principle which is a bar against all information. It's a proof against all argument, which cannot fail to keep man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is condemnation before investigation. What I'm going to ask you to do as we go into this session tonight is to set aside whatever you may have been taught or whatever you believe and try to look at it with fresh eyes and try to hear what the text is saying. And my goal is not to sell you a particular view. My goal is to equip you to do your own homework, to do your own digging, and come to your own conclusions. So the same concept is in Proverbs 18:13. He that answereth a matter before he heareth it is a folly and a shame unto him.
I would say now the Negro is inferior by nature because of Noah's curse. And so one brother during the days of slavery wanted to justify slavery, and he had set his argument up on the framework of Aristotle's thinking. He could say, now, all men are made in the image of God. And then came his minor premise, God, as everybody knows, is not a Negro, therefore the Negro is not a man. They argue now on more cultural and subtle sociological grounds. The Negro is not culturally ready for integration. And if you integrate schools and if you integrate too much, the Negro will pull the white race back a generation. And then they go on to say, you know, that the Negro is inherently criminal and all of these things. Now, these people never say to us that many of these
400 years. 400 years of a long history of struggles that culminate into what we call the black experience. If you're black, and especially if you're a black American, there are certain aspects of your life that are known universally. It's almost like when you meet another black person, these aspects of your life are broadcast somehow or sent telepathically or instantly understood. This shared consciousness is what we call blackness. A story history of a people's experience who have overcome insurmountable odds, from slavery, lynchings, to Jim Crow black laws, civil rights, mass incarcerations, private prisons. The list goes on and on. And yet, while going through the most horrific captivity known to man, these same people somehow created a culture that's not only defined the nation, but it's captivated the entire world. So while literally building the greatest nation on earth with their bare hands, producing the greatest leaders America has ever seen, like Harriet Tubman, Thurgood Marshall, Marcus Garvey, MLK, Malcolm X. But after we reminisce about all these monumental achievements and incredible stories of incredible people, the other darker, more sinister side of the black experience come to mind. With all the blood and sacrifice of our ancestors, yet still, 400 years later, lynchings are now called police shootings. 400 years later, the plantations are now called private prisons. 400 years later, black laws are now called police profiling. 400 years later, babies aren't fed to alligators but abortion clinics. 400 years later, black people are still at the bottom of economics. 400 years later, our children are still lacking in education. 400 years later, more blacks are incarcerated than were enslaved in 1619. 400 years later, black lives still don't matter. 400 years later, racism seems like it's at an all-time high. And the question I ask is why? This sent me, like many others, on a quest to find answers to why these things are happening. I heard once that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And nothing could be more insane than the situation that the Negro faces in America. So I decided that I would look back through history and see if I saw any patterns among our people. So I looked in different eras of past, post-slavery, more specifically from the end of the Reconstruction and out. But when I looked into these times, I wasn't looking for marches, sit-ins, protests, or legislation. I was looking for one thing: culture. Culture defines a people. The two terms are synonymous. And Negroes are the only demographic in America, or better yet, the world, whose culture is not rooted and carried from their homeland. No, not at all, but rather the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade's culture is merely the sum of the experiences that they've suffered under the hand of their oppressors and colonial masters. Hence the term, the Black experience. And now? Well, it seemed like we done came full circle. In essence, back to square one. We're no longer making music about overcoming oppression and banding together, more so about the celebration of our downfall. We're the only culture on earth that writes songs about the degradation and genocide of their own people. From Black and Beautiful to Niggas, Bees, and Hoes. It's almost like we burned the candle at both ends. Ran our course, burned out, devolved in a sense. The arts is one of the few tools we carry with us, and even it has become weaponized against us. So how could this be? Why the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs, the absolute deterioration of the fibers that hold communities and families together? Chaotic events and tragedies on an everyday basis. Especially when you look around and you see other races of other people not experiencing the same calamities that your people are dealing with. Why are their communities stable? What's their secret? How can immigrant communities come to America and within 30 years surpass it, become more successful, affluent, etc.? And then I came to the answer. Someone just so happened to send me a quote from the great Black civil rights leader of the past, Marcus Garvey. And the quote is simple but profound. Our people, without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture, is like a tree without roots. What is the difference between the Negro and every other racial demographic in America, besides the obvious slavery? History, culture, heritage. Like Garvey said, a tree without roots can't stand or produce fruit. It can only die or fall. And these words remind me of the Messiah. Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken to him as a wise man who built his house upon a rock. For when the rain descended and the floods came and winds blew and beat upon that house, it fell not, for it was founded upon the rock. And everyone that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not should be likened unto a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And when the rain descended and the floods came and the wind blew that beat upon that house, it fell, and great was the fall of it. A house without a foundation will fall, and a tree without roots will die. And when I came to this realization, it all made sense. See, the social economic roller coaster that's our existence in America is due to our lack of roots, identity, and culture. This is why every so many years we reinvent ourselves. Many of us just adapt to whatever the lifestyle that's presented to us in popular culture. Mainly because we are the trendsetters of popular culture, even though we really don't have a culture. Sounds confusing, right? So at this point, I've identified the problem. The next step is solution. Seems simple enough, we lack history, then we go learn history and go back to the root, right? And there's a plethora of information about Black history. I mean, every Black History Month, we learn about everybody from Harriet Tubman to MLK. But that's when it dawned on me. As great as those achievements were that were done by the leaders post-slavery, our existence didn't begin at slavery. In other words, Black history didn't start with Harriet Tubman and Thurgood Marshall. Yet every February, the mind of the Negro hits reset and we go back to square one, starting with slavery. Think about how absurd it is for you to have a month that celebrates your history, that doesn't tell you when your history started or even inform you of where you came from, what you were called, or what language you spoke. Can you imagine history books written by Europeans that started with them landing on Plymouth Rock? That doesn't even explain where they came from or what history they had prior to landing, especially when the people of whom the book is written have no clue of what these things are, what their names were, what their faith was, etc. See, one of the reasons I was so interested in our past was to find answers about the present. See, they say for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So what were the actions that led to our ancestors taking part in a reaction so extreme as this? See, not just slavery, but beatings, castrations, rapes, lynchings. Our ancestors were burned alive, tarred and feathered, pulled apart by horses, fed to alligators, chopped to pieces. Their churches were bombed and whole towns destroyed and set ablaze just for breathing. As a child in history class, I was always attentive to what was being said about slavery, looking into those eras to try to figure out why. What do we do to these people for them to hate us to this level? But to no avail. Then naturally comes the next question, which is the biggest elephant in the room that nobody wants to address. Why would God allow this? And I had people who gave me answers like, God allowed the Europeans to enslave us because our ancestors practiced voodoo. It's interesting to me that this person who couldn't even point at a map of Africa and tell me what general area we came from somehow knew that every person who came through the slave trade practiced voodoo. Even more interesting is if God put us through this because we were pagans, why weren't the Hindus enslaved? Or the Buddhists? Or the Wiccans? Why would God ignore them and punish us? Better yet, why would he single us out? Without knowledge of our history, all these are questions that plague me. So what happened to our history prior to slavery? Why is it not taught in schools? Why are blacks portrayed as a people who have been perpetual slaves since forever? Is our past stuck in some type of reality warping wormhole, or are we living in the upside down, or is this like the permanent sunken place? So I decided to get a gauge on how many people had any idea of our past prior to slavery. And the results were interesting to say the least.
What do you think about this topic? Remember to be a Berean scholar, as it is written in the book of Acts 17 verses 11 to 12. Now the Bereans were more noble-minded than the Thessalonians, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if these teachings were true. It's time to deepen your understanding and see your reflection within the sacred pages. Please like, click subscribe, and click the notification bell to stay up to date with the Berean Scholar channel.